Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying up to 10 years in prison. But now, in a twist maybe no one saw coming, reports say President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Diddy's lawyers about a possible presidential pardon. Could Trump really set Diddy free? Is this justice, politics, maybe payback? Oh, and by the way, Combs' team just filed papers to have his conviction thrown out and that he be granted a new trial.
Everything changed the moment that rumor surfaced. Not because it was confirmed, not because it was denied, but because it exposed how power really works when the stakes get high enough. 1 minute the narrative was locked in, sealed tight.
7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges. Could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these charges. But anyway, as you know, we have been following this Diddy story since it broke, 2 years ago? And one of the reasons that we can do this, to really dive into these cases, is because of the amazing support that we get from our sponsors like Upside. Now, Upside is great. It is a free app that gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials. So I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. But make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. A pardon. Okay, really a pardon. Meaning Diddy, let's say he gets 5 years in prison. Trump pardons him, he's free to go? President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says, white men like...
Moving toward an ending that felt inevitable. The next minute, the ground shifted. Quietly, almost casually, the kind of shift that doesn't come from courts or public opinion, but but from rooms the public never sees. This isn't about innocence or guilt. It never was. It's about leverage. 4 months. The story felt linear. Trouble escalated. Pressure mounted. Consequences felt unavoidable. The system appeared to be doing what it always claims it does. But systems don't run on rules alone. They run on discretion. And discretion is where reality diverges from expectation. When reports started circulating about a possible intervention from the highest level of authority, it didn't land like a bomb. It landed like confirmation. Confirmation of something people have always suspected but rarely see this clearly, that there is a final escape hatch reserved for a very specific category of individual, not the powerful, not the wealthy, but the useful. Usefulness outlives scandal. What makes this turn
Trump need to be banished? And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, "See, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who is being mistreated, not Puff Daddy." And let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, "Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon." And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account. Milo posted on X, "Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce." Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there was a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur pornography. And then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by.
So stunning isn't the idea itself. History is full of last-minute reversals. What makes it unsettling is how predictable it feels once you step back. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography, a reminder that no matter how loud the outrage gets, there are still moves available when you've played the long game correctly. The public tends to imagine justice as a straight line, cause, effect. punishment. But power doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in circles. It revisits old favors. It reactivates dormant connections. It weighs consequences not by morality, but by impact. And impact is always negotiable. The possibility of a pardon doesn't just change one person's outcome, it reframes the entire saga. Suddenly, every past decision looks different. Every alliance feels intentional. Every silence sounds strategic instead of fearful. The narrative flips from downfall to survival. Survival is the real currency here. There's a reason this potential move feels so polarizing. It pulls the curtain back on how selectively
People of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people who were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across, or men getting them across state lines. None of that was being done. This was all being done for entertainment purposes. So it's an interesting argument. I don't think this judge buys it. It might be interesting on an appeal, but I don't think the judge is going to give him a judgment of acquittal on those 2 counts based on the argument. Now, the more interesting argument to me, and it's their last argument for new trial, is that, listen, if you were just going to charge him with these 2 counts, which I originally said when I looked at all the evidence, and don't forget, I was getting calls during this trial from individuals that were telling me, hey, I have information that exonerates what they're saying against Sean Combs, essentially saying that Cassie and others were participating more than just having sex in a room. They were participating more than that. They were paying people. They were hiring people. They were sending me pictures even when Diddy wasn't around. They were asking me to come over even when Diddy wasn't around. These are what these witnesses were telling me, which is really Brady evidence. And I don't know if that was ever turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts. And he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts, but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking. And I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that. Not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution? It always felt to me that they proved that charge based purely on, the documents.
Well, I always feel like during a trial, whenever you get a guilty verdict on one of the counts or 2 of the counts out of 6 or 7, you think to yourself, is it because of these other things that they brought up, how bad he is, he's not a good guy, the video came out? Sometimes juries will split the baby, meaning, there's people that want to convict, there's people that don't want to convict, and they're like, okay, let's convict him on these acts. We can all agree we can convict him on these acts. He's not a good guy. He transported these women, these men across state lines. Let's convict him on this. There's always going to be a question of that. The only way to not have a question of that, obviously, is when the jury comes out, someone gives an interview and says, hey, this is why we did it, is because, this tape was so bad and these other incidents were so bad that we were like, we can't just let him walk with nothing. So we convicted him on the Mann Acts. Now, we don't have a juror saying that. Do I think eventually jurors are going to start coming out? Yeah, I think so. I think some of these jurors are going to come out. They're going to want to do some interviews, not before sentencing. And I think after sentencing, I think some of them will come out and we'll discuss it, because I think that was the feeling I was getting from this jury and the reactions they had to Comey's closing, and even the reaction just in general to the 5 or the 6 U.S. attorney team. I think their reactions in general.
Mercy is applied. Mercy isn't granted because someone deserves it. It's granted because someone matters to the right equation, because their downfall creates more inconvenience than their release. That's the calculation people hate confronting. The moment reports surfaced suggesting a possible intervention from the very top, everything slowed down, certainty dissolved, language softened. The same voices that once spoke in absolutes started adding qualifiers, not because new facts appeared, but because new possibilities did. Possibility is the real currency of power. This isn't about morality, it isn't about justice, it's about usefulness and timing. When someone becomes more valuable intact than destroyed, the system recalculates. That recalculation doesn't happen publicly. It happens behind closed doors where outcomes are weighed like assets, not verdicts. People love to believe fate is earned, that actions automatically trigger consequences. But fate, at this level, is negotiated, it's revised, it's deferred.
Were very noticeable, and I think that this is a jury that wants to talk to people once I think he gets sentenced.
Okay, so now let's move on to the pardon discussion. So if he can't get relief from the court in getting the conviction thrown out or a new trial, can he get relief through a pardon? Before we talk about is this a real thing, what is the process to even obtain a federal pardon? How do you even go about that?
Sure. So it's a pardon or a commutation. If someone is actually in custody, they could also get a commutation, which does not wipe the crime off your record. It just allows you to get out of jail. So he has that option to give him a commutation. If he gets sentenced, he can also give him a commutation. But as for the process, there's an application on the DOJ website, and I'm part of some charities that also do a lot of pro bono work for pardons and commutations. You can fill out this form, DOJ website. It essentially lists the reasons why you should get a pardon, what kind of community service you've done, things of that nature. There's a separate application for a commutation, but you can file a pardon application, and you could also say, hey, listen, if it's not a pardon, I'm looking for a commutation. You attach your indictment, you would reasons why you feel your crime was you were unfairly prejudiced or unfairly convicted. All of those things go into the packet. I always try to help people that are filling it out on their own to show them, what to point out. Those type of cases are always heartening because those people deserve pardons. They deserve commutations if they're in and it's some sort of crazy drug offense that was brought up in the 90s. All of those things are reasons for pardons and commutations.
So is this real? I mean, here's the thing. He is in a much better position to get a pardon or a commutation of his sentence because he wasn't convicted of sex trafficking and racketeering. There is a way to justify this based on some of the arguments I just mentioned that his defense team is making that maybe he shouldn't have been brought up on this. The I-Man Act, not as serious as what he's facing. Is this real? Do you think that this is going to happen? That he's going to get a pardon or a commutation from President Trump?
So I don't know if he's going to get one. I do think that it's real because, like I said before, President Trump, whether they like him, don't like him, if he feels something is wrong, and we've seen this happen before in the past, if he feels something is wrong, someone got railroaded, someone was convicted, wrongfully, he will take a look at that. Yeah, Sean Combs has said things in the past that probably were not great. I've read them, but I think that if anyone understands that, I mean, look at President Trump's cabinet. There's individuals on his cabinet. His vice president has said things in the past that weren't great for him. But he understands that people evolve, people change their minds. People understand that there's certain requirements, things that are going on, certain pressures that they're under. And I don't think that would affect whether or not he would grant a pardon or commutation based on things that were said in the past. I think it would be based on what he gets sentenced to or based on the facts of the Mann Act, that the Mann Act itself, I think, is unconstitutional. I think there's issues the way that it was applied in this case.
But from an optics point of view, I don't know, moral point of view, what about everything that came out of trial? The texts, the bruises, the intercontinental tape. It's not like you can say Diddy is totally clean, that he's a complete angel. Yes, he was acquitted of the most serious charges, but the evidence that came out during the course of the trial, wouldn't it be difficult for the president to justify maybe pardoning Diddy? Maybe it is a commutation. Maybe it is, if he gets 5 years, he says, okay, I'm commuting it down to 2 or 2.5. I don't know how it would work, but that's the part that I think people might be struggling with and what you heard, I think, from Megyn Kelly.
And even his own...
It's sometimes erased entirely if the right balance is struck. That's why this turn feels so unsettling, not because it's unbelievable, but because it's believable enough to expose how fragile accountability really is. The idea that one signature, one decision, could wipe away an entire trajectory forces people to confront a reality they'd rather ignore. Rules aren't equal, they're flexible. The outrage that followed wasn't really about this specific situation. It was about recognition that there are multiple versions of the system running at the same time. This moment forces a reckoning with how influence intersects with authority, not officially, not on paper, but informally, through mutual benefit and shared history. When those lines blur, accountability becomes optional. Optional accountability is the luxury of proximity. What's especially telling is how fast the conversation shifted. One whisper, and suddenly everything slowed down. Media tone softened, certainty evaporated, words like allegedly and reportedly took.
And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, you know, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits, and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades, okay? And so, as has been said before, you know, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, you know, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person? But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused, or you know, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, you know, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now,
Took center stage. The same story that once felt sealed now feels suspended. Suspension is power's favorite state. This isn't about a signature on a document. It's about the signal it sends. The signal that no matter how severe things appear, the game isn't over until every door is checked. And some doors only open for people who were never meant to face the ending the public expects. The outrage that followed wasn't just emotional. It was existential. People weren't angry because of one individual. They were angry because it confirmed a hierarchy they're constantly told doesn't exist. A hierarchy where consequences scale downward, not upward. The higher you are, the more exits you have. Supporters frame it as mercy, critics frame it as corruption, but both miss the point. This isn't personal, it's structural. It's the system functioning exactly as designed, not as advertised. The design favors continuity over disruption, stability over justice, control over closure. That's why this possibility feels so deflating to some.
That's certainly one way of looking at things. And there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you know what, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen. But it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake-up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won. Because he has, not only did he have a criminal case he had to deal with, but he has upwards of 20, 30 civil cases
I think even
that he's
more
also
than
going to have
that.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of those cases, even if it's not proved by the victim that it happened, he is still going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees for each and every single case, and maybe millions for the more serious and those that get further down the line. So he's not done paying for his transgressions. And I think that for other people who are in similarly situated positions of power and influence, they certainly took notes from the Diddy trial and figured out, hey, if I continue to act like a pig, pigs get slaughtered.
Yes, they do. And I just remember even in the outcome of the Sean Combs lawsuits that were filed, even probably before he was indicted, we were hearing and seeing more civil suits filed against other people. And even after this case, we've seen more high profile figures have complaints against them, like, Tyler Perry and Shannon Sharp and Smokey Robinson, all of which have denied the allegations against them. But I do think that,
and so unsurprising to others, it depends on whether you still believe outcomes are earned, or whether you've accepted that they're negotiated. Negotiation doesn't happen in public. Behind the scenes, this kind of move isn't dramatic, it's procedural, it's discussed in terms of optics, timing, backlash management, it's weighed against other priorities, it's reduced to pros and cons on a list that never includes public trust. Public trust is renewable, influence is not. If this intervention happens, it won't be explained fully, it never is. There will be vague language about fairness, redemption, or extraordinary circumstances, enough words to fill a press release, not enough to answer real questions. And then attention will move on. That's the most important part. The system relies on fatigue, on the knowledge that outrage burns hot and fast, while power moves slow and patient. Waiting people out is easier than confronting them. The stunning part isn't that this could happen, it's that it took this long for people to accept that it might. For some, this feels like the story being stolen at the last page. For others, it feels like the ending was always obvious. Both reactions can exist at the same time. What matters is what lingers after. Because even if nothing happens, the damage is already done. The idea alone reshapes perception. It tells everyone watching that accountability has a ceiling, that consequences are conditional, that the rules change depending on who's standing in the spotlight. And once that realization sets in, it doesn't fade. People will remember this moment not for the decision itself, but for what it revealed, that when power feels cornered, it doesn't fight, it exits, quietly, legally, cleanly. No dramatic escape, just a door opening that most people never knew was there. That's why this feels so heavy. It's not about one life-changing direction. It's about millions realizing that the system they're judged by isn't the same one judging those at the top. And that realization doesn't spark riots, it sparks resignation. Resignation is far more dangerous. Because when people stop expecting fairness, they stop believing in the process altogether, they disengage, they grow cynical, they accept imbalance as permanent. That's the true fallout. Whether the pardon happens or not, the story has already crossed a line. It's shown how thin the barrier is between consequence and exemption, how quickly fate can turn when authority enters the picture. Stunning turns don't come from miracles, they come from access. And access has always been the real power behind every ending.